Welcome everyone to Whimsy Woven Stories. Here, we explore gripping tales of real-life twists. Join our storytelling community. Several years ago, I found myself in a situation that will become a tangled web of secrets, betrayal, and uncomfortable living conditions. It all began when I became roommates with a couple I had known through work. Sarah, a charming and ambitious woman, and her husband, Mark, had suggested I move in with them to help ease their living expenses. Their friendly demeanor and the promise of companionship made the arrangement seem ideal at first. For the first few months, everything felt normal. We shared meals and laughs, and I settled into my role as the roommate who often kept to himself. But as the days passed, an unsettling tension hung in the air. Mark worked long hours, and Sarah seemed increasingly restless. I brushed it off as stress from their busy lives, unaware that I was standing on the precipice of a brewing storm. One evening, as I returned home early from work, I heard muffled voices coming from the living room. Curiosity piqued, I paused at the door, and what I witnessed shattered the fragile illusion of our domestic bliss. Sarah was in the arms of another man, the same man I had seen visiting more frequently in recent weeks. I felt my stomach drop. The guilt of knowing the secret weighed heavily on me, but the fear of repercussions kept me silent. I wasn't on the lease and could easily be kicked out. Sarah noticed me lurking and froze. With panic in her eyes, she hurried to me, pleading that I keep this a secret from Mark. Her words tangled in my mind, a chorus of confusion and moral conflict. I had no loyalty to her infidelity, but my own precarious living situation loomed large. I agreed, my silence sealing her fate and forging an invisible chain that bound me to a lie. Weeks turned into a blur of avoidance. I watched Sarah and her lover share stolen moments in the house while Mark remained oblivious. Each time he left for work, I felt a twinge of guilt as Sarah's laughter echoed through the halls, a bitter reminder of the truth that I kept hidden. Eventually, the facade crumbled, but not because of me. Mark, with his unyielding instincts, discovered the affair on his own. The confrontation was explosive, shaking the very foundation of our shared home. I could hear their argument through the thin walls, Mark's rage laced with heartbreak and betrayal. I remained in my room, paralyzed by fear and guilt, knowing that I had played a part in this tragic unraveling. When Mark confronted me, I expected anger or accusations. Instead, he seemed broken, like a man whose entire world had collapsed. I could only offer a meek apology, feeling the weight of my silence heavy on my conscience. But the storm didn't pass quickly. Days later, I learned from Mark that his mother was involved in their mortgage, and they decided to kick me out. I wasn't even granted a proper goodbye. They were considering divorce, and it seemed my presence was a reminder of their broken trust. I packed my things, feeling the bitter sting of betrayal and loss, but also relief. I no longer had to navigate the rancid odor of cat litter that permeated the house or avoid Mark's ever-watchful cameras, which felt more like a prison than a home. Months later, I heard whispers that Mark and Sarah had reconciled. The news struck me with disbelief. After everything, how could they choose to stay together? Part of me wished I had spoken up. Perhaps the truth could have guided them to a different path. But another part felt grateful that I was free from the chaos. I learned later that this wasn't the first time Sarah had strayed. This was the third affair she'd had with the same person, a fact that made me question her judgment and loyalty. Mark, in his desire for stability, seemed willing to overlook the past, trading his dignity for the comfort of familiarity. In retrospect, living with them had been a lesson in moral ambiguity. I was thrust into the role of an unwilling witness, bearing witness to a tumultuous relationship marred by betrayal and unresolved issues. The truth became a burden I carried alone, and I found solace in my newfound independence. As I sit here years later, the memory lingers, a reminder of the complexities of friendship, loyalty, and the weight of secrets. It taught me that sometimes silence is not an option, and that living in the shadows can come at cost. I'm curious to hear what you all think about this experience. Would you have acted differently? What would you have done in my shoes? After moving out, I found myself navigating the tumultuous waters of independence and self-reflection. I had dodged the chaos of Sarah and Mark's relationship, but I was left with lingering questions about loyalty and morality. Would I have acted differently if I had known their history? Was I complicit in their dysfunction by remaining silent? Living alone had its challenges, especially after being part of a household. I learned to appreciate the quiet moments, but I also wrestled with the loneliness that came with it. I sought solace in friendships, rekindling connections that had faded while I lived with Sarah and Mark. Yet, every time I shared my story, I felt a sense of vulnerability. It was a delicate balancing act between honesty and shame. As the months rolled by, I often found myself drawn back to thoughts of my former roommates. I tried to avoid the topic with friends, but the whispers about Sarah's new life, her seemingly perfect facade with Mark, were hard to ignore. They had created an illusion of happiness that left many questioning their choices, including my own. One night, after a few too many drinks at a local bar, I ran into Mark. He looked different, more haggard than I remembered, his eyes clouded with a mixture of regret and resignation. As we exchanged awkward pleasantries, the memories of the past flooded back, and I felt an urge to speak. "Hey, Mark," I started, hesitating. "How have you been?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Better than I deserve, I guess." His tone was heavy, a stark contrast to the jovial persona he used to wear. "Sarah and I are making it work. It's complicated." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I hope it's better than before." He looked at me, vulnerability etched on his face. I always thought I could forgive her. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just fooling myself. She says she wants to change, but it's hard to trust her again. I felt the weight of his words, resonating with my own guilt. "You deserve honesty, Mark. You don't have to settle just to keep the peace." "I know," he replied, taking a deep breath. "But sometimes the thought of being alone is scarier than the pain of betrayal." Our conversation spiraled into a cathartic sharing of our respective struggles. I realized then that beneath the surface of their marriage, Mark was fighting battles I had never considered. As much as I had viewed him as the victim, he was grappling with his own insecurities and fears. "Have you talked to Sarah about all this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Not really. She says she wants to move forward, but I can't shake the feeling that her heart isn't fully in it. It's like she's just going through the motions," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The honesty of his confession struck me. Here was a man wrestling with the consequences of love, betrayal, and the heavy burden of forgiveness. I felt a strange camaraderie with him, despite the distance my silence had created. Weeks turned into months, and I often found myself thinking of Mark and Sarah. I knew their relationship was tumultuous, but the fact that they were still together felt like an affront to everything I believed about loyalty. I wondered if they were simply stuck in a cycle of comfort and betrayal, unwilling to break free from the chains they had forged together. Then, one day, I received a message from Mark. "Can we talk?" he wrote, and I felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. We met at a cafe, and the air was thick with unspoken words. "I need to talk to you about Sarah," he began, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about what you said that night at the bar. You were right. I shouldn't just settle." I sat back, surprised. "What do you mean?" I confronted her about everything, he said, determination flashing in his eyes. I asked her if she was truly committed to making things work, or if she was just scared of being alone. And she confessed. She said she was in love with someone else. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought of all the times I had witnessed Sarah's flirty demeanor, her captivating charm. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my heart racing at the potential fallout. "I'm filing for divorce," he stated, his resolve unwavering. "I can't keep pretending. I deserve better." A mix of admiration and sadness washed over me. I admired his strength to take that step, yet I could see the weight of uncertainty pressing on him. "Have you thought about how this will affect you? I mean, you'll have to face your mom and the fallout from the family." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, but I can't let that dictate my happiness anymore. I'm ready to start fresh, even if it's difficult." As we talked, I could see a flicker of hope in his eyes, a glimmer of the man I once knew before all the heartbreak. We delved deeper into the emotional toll of their marriage, the complexities of trust and betrayal, and the realization that love isn't always enough to keep two people together. After our conversation, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had been a bystander to their chaos for too long, and it felt good to finally be part of the solution. As weeks passed, I watched as Mark took control of his life. He began focusing on his health, started seeing a therapist, and surrounded himself with supportive friends. Slowly, he began to rediscover his identity outside of his tumultuous relationship. Meanwhile, Sarah reached out to me, hoping to rebuild bridges I had thought were burned. She wanted to meet for coffee, and while part of me wanted to refuse, I recognized that I needed closure on that chapter of my life. When we met, she wore an air of desperation. "I wanted to apologize for everything," she began, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I know I hurt you, and I regret it. But I need to be honest with you. I'm in love with someone else. Mark deserves to know that." Her confession was like a dagger to my heart. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. "You made your choices, Sarah. You can't keep using others to fill the void you created," I said, my voice steady. "You owe it to yourself and to Mark to be truthful." "I know, and I'm trying to do better," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I need to figure out my own life first." In that moment, I realized that Sarah was lost, trapped in a cycle of her own making. But I also recognized that I could no longer carry the weight of their past on my shoulders. I could let go of my guilt and embrace my own journey. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't anticipated. I no longer had to grapple with the burden of silence. Mark was finally free to pursue a healthier path, and I was free to move forward with my own life, unencumbered by their drama. Over the next few months, I watched as Mark rebuilt his life, dating again and focusing on himself. It was refreshing to see him shed the weight of a toxic relationship and step into his own power. As for Sarah, I knew she had a long road ahead. I hoped she would eventually confront her choices and find a way to embrace her own authenticity. In the end, my experience with Sarah and Mark became a defining chapter in my life, a cautionary tale about the complexities of relationships and the importance of honesty. I learned that sometimes silence can be just as damaging as betrayal, and that true friendship means being willing to face uncomfortable truths. And as I looked back on those years, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I was no longer the passive observer in their drama. I had become an active participant in my own life, forging my path with lessons learned from their mistakes. The tangled web of my past had ultimately led me to a place of clarity and growth, and for that I was thankful. As the months slipped by, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the nature of relationships, loyalty, and the consequences of silence. Mark's journey of self-discovery was a constant reminder of the importance of honesty, not just in romantic relationships but also in friendships. I began to question my own choices and the boundaries I set for myself. After Mark's separation from Sarah, our friendship blossomed in unexpected ways. We often met for coffee or dinner, sharing stories and insights about our lives, all while navigating the complexities of our past. It felt cathartic, a space where we could unload the burdens we had carried for far too long. One night, as we sat on a park bench, surrounded by the soft glow of streetlights, Mark turned to me. I didn't realize how trapped I felt until I started talking to you. It's like I've been in this fog, and now I'm finally seeing things clearly. I smiled, appreciating his openness. It's amazing what happens when you strip away the layers of fear and guilt. You realize you can choose happiness, even after betrayal. He nodded, his gaze distant. I've been thinking about the future a lot lately. I want to date again, but I'm terrified of repeating my mistakes. How do you trust someone after you've been hurt so deeply? Trust is a delicate thing, I replied thoughtfully. It takes time to rebuild, both within yourself and with others. But you can't let past betrayals dictate your future. You have to be willing to be vulnerable again. Mark took a deep breath, as if absorbing my words. You're right. I can't let fear hold me back. But I also don't want to rush into anything. I need to focus on me first. Absolutely. Take your time. Discover what you want and who you are outside of a relationship, I encouraged. It's the only way you'll truly heal. As we talked, I couldn't help but think about Sarah. I had distanced myself from her after our last meeting, feeling that her path was hers to navigate without my input. But she had been on my mind lately, especially as I learned more about her struggles from Mark. It was evident that she had been grappling with the aftermath of her choices, and I wondered if she had begun to confront her own demons. One evening, while out running errands, I unexpectedly crossed paths with Sarah at a local bookstore. The air was thick with tension as we exchanged hesitant smiles. I was surprised to find that she looked different, more grounded, perhaps even a bit fragile. Hey, she said, her voice soft. Can we talk? Sure, I replied, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. We found a quiet corner in the cafe adjacent to the bookstore, and I could see the weight of her burdens reflected in her eyes. I know things have been complicated between us, she began, her voice shaky. But I wanted to reach out because I'm working on myself, and I thought maybe you could help me. How so? I asked, genuinely curious. I'm trying to figure out who I am without the chaos. I realize that I've been living for others for too long, Mark, my family, even my friends. I don't want to be that person anymore, she admitted, her vulnerability disarming. I watched her closely, noting the sincerity in her words. That sounds like a good first step, but it won't be easy. Are you ready for that kind of introspection? She nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. I've started therapy, and I'm trying to make amends. I reached out to Mark, and we talked about everything. It was hard, but I think it was necessary. I felt a flicker of hope at her admission. That's good to hear, Sarah. Acknowledging the past is crucial, but what are you doing to change your future? I've been focusing on myself, getting back to things I love, like painting and volunteering, she said, a spark of enthusiasm igniting in her voice. And I want to make amends with you, too. I regret how I treated you, and I realize now how my actions affected not just Mark, but also you. Her sincerity surprised me, stirring a mix of emotions I thought I had buried. I appreciate that, Sarah. It's hard to reconcile the person I knew with the actions you took, but I'm glad you're trying to make changes. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just wanted to let you know that I'm sorry, she said, her eyes earnest. And if you're open to it, I'd like to rebuild our friendship. The request hung in the air, heavy with possibilities. I thought of all the pain and drama I had endured, but I also remembered the moments of joy and laughter we had shared before everything fell apart. I'm willing to consider it, I replied cautiously, but it will take time. As we continued to talk, I began to see glimmers of the Sarah I once knew, the passionate, creative woman who had captivated me before betrayal clouded our lives. It was refreshing, yet I remained guarded, aware that change requires sustained effort. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I slowly rebuilt our connection. We exchanged messages, met for coffee, and shared our evolving journeys. She was earnest in her efforts to change, often sharing her progress with me. I learned about her struggles with self-doubt and the steps she was taking to rebuild her sense of identity. Meanwhile, Mark continued to flourish, dating new people and embracing life outside the confines of his former marriage. I watched him grow more confident and self-assured, a transformation that filled me with pride. One evening, Mark invited me to a small gathering at his new apartment, a celebration of newfound freedom. As I entered, I was struck by the warmth of the atmosphere. Laughter filled the room, and the scent of homemade food wafted through the air. I spotted Mark across the room, chatting with a few friends, his smile genuine and bright. As the night unfolded, I was introduced to new faces, all part of this fresh chapter in Mark's life. The energy was infectious, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in a long time. In the corner, I noticed Sarah chatting with a few guests. She seemed at ease, her laughter ringing out as she engaged in conversation. I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for her, too. Despite the tumult of our past, it was refreshing to see her embracing life with renewed vigor. As the night wore on, I found myself reflecting on how far we had all come. The road to healing wasn't linear, but it was a journey worth taking. Mark and Sarah were both evolving, each learning from their mistakes, and I felt grateful to be a part of that process, even in a small way. Towards the end of the night, Mark raised his glass, drawing everyone's attention. I just want to say a quick word. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm grateful for the people who have stood by me during some pretty dark times. It's been a journey, but I'm ready to embrace whatever comes next. The room erupted in cheers, and I felt a warmth spread through me. The past had shaped us, but it wouldn't define our futures. As I stood there, surrounded by friends, I felt a sense of hope for what lay ahead. Life was a tapestry of connections, some intricate, others tangled, but each thread contributed to the bigger picture. The journey of healing, forgiveness, and growth was never easy, but was necessary. And so, I found myself eager for what the future held, ready to embrace my own journey while supporting those I cared about along the way. Life was messy, complex, and sometimes painful, but through it all, I had learned one crucial lesson. It's never too late to start anew. As I look back on that chapter of my life, I realize it taught me the importance of resilience, the power of honesty, and the beauty of growth. Each relationship, no matter how challenging, shapes us in ways we may not fully understand until years later. And in this intricate dance of life, we learn that love, friendship, and honesty can lead us to unexpected, beautiful places. Hey listeners, what do you think? Was it worth the struggle, or would you have chosen a different path? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the complexities of relationships and the journey of self-discovery. Thanks for listening. Share your opinion in comment section, and also do like and subscribe to the channel.